Best Management Practices Advisory Committee, chaired by Scott Riggins. Scott has asked me to do some of the logistics and introductory pieces of this meeting. Scott's got his own topic to cover it within the agenda, and we'll get to the agenda in a minute. But first, I'm going to turn to DWR staff person, Maggie Martin, who will go over the webinar logistics with all of us. Maggie, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. This is Maggie Martin. I'm a management plan specialist here at ADWR, and I'm going to be going over the webinar logistics. Please remain muted unless you are speaking. If you would like to speak, please type your name in the chat, or if you prefer, you can type your comments and questions into the chat, and we will read those aloud. Please make sure to send all of your messages to everyone in the chat so that they do not get missed. If you have any technical difficulties throughout the meeting, you can contact the ADWR help desk. Their phone number and email are on the screen, and this meeting and chat will be recorded.
Thanks, Maggie. I'll leave this slide up for just a quick second in case anyone needs to write down the help desk telephone number or email address before we move on. So hold on a sec. Okay, I'll ask for the next slide. Again, this is Ag, Water Conservation Best Management Practice Advisory Committee. Next slide, please. Here is the agenda. So this agenda was put together in concert by myself and Scott Riggins. And you can see we're in the welcome and introductions phase. I'll be talking a little bit about the purpose and scope of this committee, the executive order that created it originally, and the new executive order continuing it, the fifth management plan proposal and timeline, which I think Natalie Mass will be doing, and a little bit of about process to identify and develop other issues that this committee might address. We have some issues already we've identified, and we'll get into that. Scott Riggins will give us the history of this BMP program and the committee, and I'm thankful for that for Scott, because I don't have that history, and really we don't have anyone left in DWR who does. So we're really relying on Scott and some other members, long-time members of this committee. Then we'll talk about some next steps type of information. So next slide, please. Again, we'll talk about the purpose and the scope and structure of the committee. So again, next slide. There was an executive order in 2002 establishing this committee for the purpose of advising the director of DWR on the development of an Ag BMP program for inclusion in the third management plan and consideration of the director for inclusion in the fourth management plan and the fifth management plan. That executive order also provides that the Ag BMP committee would terminate upon the adoption of the fourth management plan. So unfortunately, there was an internal inconsistency there, asking for input to the director for the fifth management plan and terminating the committee when the fourth management plan was done. The inconsistency that we have subsequently fixed. So the next slide. So for among other reasons, Governor Ducey recently issued Executive Order 2020-55, providing for the continuation of this committee, again, as an advisory committee to the director of DWR. It continues that committee through the adoption of the final groundwater management plans, whatever that might be. And of course, right now, we're required to have 5 plans. If additional plans are required of the department, this executive order would kick in for those plans as well. The other change made to the original executive order at the request of agricultural representatives was to have an additional irrigation district representative added to the committee. And we'll go through the makeup of the committee in later slides. So take the next slide, please. So here's the membership. It is the director of DWR or my designee, the Director of the Department of Agriculture, Mark Killian in this case, or his designee, Director of the U.S. Arid Land Agriculture Research Center, or the Director's designee, and he has designated somebody, and I believe that group's out of Maricopa. 4 members actively engaged in agricultural production in an active management area, of which 2 have expressed an interest in participating or are currently participating in a best management practice program. 3 other members representing irrigation districts, 1 member representing an agricultural improvement district, which there's only 1, and that's the Salt River Project, and then 1 member representing a municipality in an active management area. So looking at the former list of members, many of those members are either no longer working or in some cases, sadly, no longer with us. So we have a chore here to fill out the membership as we move forward, and that's actively being worked on as we speak. So the next slide, please. So here are the existing members with names. Again, myself, Mark Killian. For the feds, it's Steve Bronson, again, from the Arid Land Agricultural Research Center, an agricultural producer in a BMP program is Scott Riggins, the chair, and Scott was the chair under the prior executive order. And then a second agricultural producer in a BMP program, Brian Hartman from Hartman Ranches. Next slide. We also have as an agricultural producer, Ron Wong from Bwk Farms in the Tucson AMA. We just this morning were able to send out a message to Ron, so we haven't heard back from him yet about his desire to continue. And then you can see the open slots, another ag producer, 3 irrigation district folks, an ag improvement district, SRP again, and a municipality. And so some of the agricultural stakeholders have proposed some names to us. Some of those folks, I think, have been applying to the governor's boards and commissions through their website to fill these open spots. Kind of that's how it works. If there's interest, you can go to the boards and commissions website through the governor's office website and see opportunities to apply for these boards and commissions positions, and you can do so if you so desire. And the boards and commissions office, with the help of Natural Resources Policy Advisor Chuck Podolak, will be culling through those and making the selections. Next slide. So regarding some of the procedures and the chairperson, so the advisory committee, and this is language right out of the executive order, and by the way, the executive order is posted on DWR's website, the full order. The advisory committee shall elect a chairperson from the appointed members. The member of the advisory committee serving as chair shall continue to serve until the advisory committee elects a new chair or the person is replaced. So given Scott Riggins' current role on the chair, he will continue in that role, and from my perspective, should continue in that role until all of the open seats are filled, and then it would be appropriate at that time to consider how we move forward with this piece of the executive order in relation to electing a chair. And just recently, in a closer reading of the original executive order and the current executive order, the director of DWR is simply a committee member, not the co-chair of the committee. So I may have misspoken in a couple of public meetings about this subject prior, including yesterday's 5MP Agricultural Stakeholder Group meeting. So again, the committee is also charged with establishing procedures to guide its operation. These may include participation requirements and criteria for removing inactive members. And then the committee shall meet at the call of the director, myself, or the chairperson, or at the request of the majority of the members. And because this committee is established by executive order, the committee is not subject to the Arizona open meeting law. which will simplify things a bit, but we still intend these meetings to be open, transparent, and in the virtual world, we'll do this virtually. When we get back to the non-virtual world post-COVID, I would anticipate we'll have face-to-face meetings and at the same time have the possibility of virtual attendance, because I think that will help open up spots that we can't really have everyone in one room at one time if we have a very big number of participants, which I hope we eventually do. I will also mention that I have offered to Scott that DWR will essentially act as his staff in his role as the chair, help him with agendas, help him with organization, help him with meeting materials and such, and Scott is amenable, I believe, to that outcome. So hopefully that will take some of the burden off Scott and help us make this committee run smoothly. So next slide. So again, the role of the committee is to advise the director of the Department of Water Resources on the development of an agricultural best management practices program to be included in the groundwater management plans pursuant to Title 45, blah, 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 the groundwater code essentially. In fulfilling this responsibility, the advisory committee shall do several things. One, recommend in consultation with the agricultural community and the department a BMP program that can be applied to the majority of farm units within the active management areas, and that will achieve conservation savings that are at least equivalent to that required of the base agricultural conservation program, again, required under the statutes. So I'll say again, I think we anticipate part of the way the consultation with the ag community will work is certainly through this committee and participation by non-members of the committee, but also there will be a nexus between this committee and DWR's fifth management plan agricultural stakeholder group. So there'll be several opportunities for that consultation with the agricultural community. So next slide, please. Continuing the discussion of the role. We need to recommend detailed criteria for evaluating agricultural water management practices, including any best management practices as they pertain to the development of the best management practices program, and gives examples of criteria, including the level of utilization of the practices and participation in the BMP program, and factors affecting participation, agricultural water use and its impact on the achievement of the management goal of the active management area, the administrative burden associated with implementing the best management practices. Obviously, that burden falls on both the department and the stakeholders, the water right holders, the irrigation grandfathered right holders. And the quality of best management practices, education and research programs, and the identification of appropriate methods of analysis and facilitation of appropriate collection and utilization of data. Next slide. This committee must review and evaluate research projects both in Arizona and elsewhere, if appropriate, undertaken to evaluate current management practices and any comprehensive best management practices programs, evaluate the relationship between the BMP program and the base program, review and evaluate proposed best management practices, recommend changes for inclusion in a management plan, consider what research or educational resources are necessary to develop new BMPs, and make recommendations on any new BMP practices to be developed or implemented, and make recommendations to develop an educational program concerning adoption of best management practices, participation in the best management practices program. Further, before we get on to the next presentation, I just want to say that we talked yesterday in the fifth management plan agricultural group about the fourth management plan and the BMPs and that program as proposed in DWR's fourth management plan for the Pinal active management area. And we let everyone know that with the agreement and it was still with some reservations, but with the agreement of agricultural constituencies, we're going to continue moving forward with what we propose in the fourth management plan. We're not making changes, but I want it to be known that this committee and the BMP program for the fifth management plan, the outcome or the actions there for the fifth management plan are not predisposed by the outcome of the fourth management plan. So everything is up for grabs, starting from ground zero. Again, that was an ask of the ag community in relation, I believe, to acquiescing to moving forward with the fourth management plan in the timely manner that we need to do so. And we'll segue into the next presentation, and that is the fifth management proposal and timeline. And Natalie Mast, who really has been running the DWR fifth management plan agricultural group meetings, will get into that presentation. But I will stop, and I do want to stop for just a brief second. Scott, I don't know if you want to weigh in at this point, or if anybody would like to ask questions or make comments about what I have spoken about so far. So I will pause. Scott, I'll give you the first shot if you want to do so. If not, we'll look for people that can unmute themselves. People will be able to unmute themselves as well. So Scott?
Thank you very much, Director Bwk, and good morning. Thank you for very much for going over the executive order. It definitely lays out the framework of how we work and try to establish the best management practices that fit the agricultural community and also are recognized as valuable by the Department of Water Resources. That is our job in a nutshell. And you just explained it perfectly, and I have no statements on it, and I'll wait to speak more when I come to my agenda item.
Thank you, Scott. Are there others who would like to ask questions or make comments at this point? Again, I'll pause for a second.
Thank you, Director. I have Kevin Bronson, who has typed his name into the chat box. I wasn't sure if that was an introduction or if you wish to speak, Kevin.
No, I was just clarifying. I think I was called Stephen Bronson. Steve Naranjo is our Center Director at the U.S. Arid Land. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
We apologize. Somewhere we got our emails crossed, no doubt. And I appreciate that you will be working with us and that you stepped up to fulfill that role. Very much appreciated. Kevin. So I'll wait another quick second here. I'm not seeing anybody.
Tom, this is Dave Roberts.
Yes, Dave.
So when we get to the discussion of the history of how the BMP program came about, I will, depending on how Scott presents this, I may supplement this. SRP was heavily involved in this process in the late 90s, early 2000s, myself and John Hetrick particularly. And so we have a lot of background about how this started, why it started, the intent of it as well, what it was trying to solve, and things of that nature. So I'll let Scott provide his overview, and then if there's anything to supplement, I'd be happy to do that as well. Thanks.
That's awesome, Dave, because many of us are going to be on a steep learning curve. And I'll just say, for those of you who don't know, Dave's predecessor at SRP, John Sullivan, was the member filling that slot in the original committee. So folks should be aware of that. So thanks, Dave. Anyone else?
Thank you, Director. I'm not seeing anything else in the chat box at this time.
All right, thanks. We'll move on then to Natalie's presentation.
Great. Thank you, Director. See if I can get, there we go. So as Director Bwk said, my name is Natalie Mast. I am the AMA Director responsible for the management plans at ADWR. We have been using the Fifth Management Plans Work Group process to work through the development of the Fifth Management Plans. The progress we've made is well documented on our 5MP concepts page on our website. But we are working on a pretty tight timeline for developing and finalizing those Fifth Management Plans. You can see that on the screen here. We established the work group in mid-2019 and intended to have that work group run through the remainder of 2020 so that we could take 2021 to actually draft those 5 Fifth Management Plans and then adopt those plans in 2022 with the intent of having the conservation programs in those plans become effective on January 1st, 2025. So we are clearly not going to quite meet our timeline for completing the work group activities by the end of this year. We are intending to continue those into at least the first quarter of next year, but we are hoping to complete most of those discussions under that work group across the sectors, including agriculture, in the next few months in order to focus our staff efforts on drafting those Fifth Management Plans. So we will coordinate with this group, but I guess the main message there is that really we will have to work kind of on an aggressive timeline, on an aggressive schedule in order to meet this timeline for the Fifth Management Plans. We will be, as we move into the drafting phase for the Fifth Management Plans, we will be occasionally continuing work group meetings and other stakeholder meetings in order to work through kind of the AMA specific customizations that may be needed for those Fifth Management Plans, and also to provide updates and request feedback on some of the draft language in those plans. So to our chair, Mr. Riggins, and to the Director Bwk, I just really want to reiterate that we will need to coordinate the schedule of this committee with this timeline. We're hoping that these discussions can fall in sequence with the 5MP discussions, and I really do appreciate that the chair helped us get this committee launched so quickly in order to help coordinate with this timeline and keep these plans on schedule for completion by the end of 2022. We do, oops, there we go. We did have a ag work group meeting yesterday, and we do have a management plans work group meeting next week, Wednesday. So in that management plans work group meeting, we intend to preview some of our plans for the Fifth Management Plans, talking a little bit about our drafting schedule and some of the ideas that we have for making those Fifth Management Plans look a little bit different than the plans you may have seen in the past. So that meeting information is available on ADWR's website, both on the 5MP page and on ADWR's public meetings calendar. Our next agricultural subgroup is tentatively scheduled for January 27th, and additional information about those meetings will be emailed out and also posted to our public meetings calendar. So with that, I will hand it back to Tom to talk through some of the potential issues that we've heard in that Fifth Management Plans group and in other stakeholder discussions regarding potential issues for this committee.
So before I do that, just make sure everyone heard Natalie correctly. So we do need to start drafting, probably start of the second quarter of next year. But as she described during the drafting process, there's still opportunity to weigh in. So this group does not have to complete its work by the end of the first quarter, but we will be on a pretty aggressive schedule in this group, I believe. And certainly a large part of this group's work, and recommendation back to the director probably needs to be done by the end of the second quarter.
Yes.
There'll still be some room after that for tweaking here or there, but to meet our schedule, we're going to have to be pretty aggressive. So we have this chart up about potential issues for this committee to consider. So some background on the genesis of this chart. So DWR has been meeting with a group called the Ag Collaborator Subgroup. It's 20 folks from the ag sector, a couple of legislators, et cetera, who raised some concerns about the fourth management plan. So we set up meetings, and we've had several meetings with the group since late September. The group made a presentation yesterday to the fifth management plan group, which you can see on our website once we get it posted. It's not posted yet, but we'll be posting the materials from yesterday's meeting. So they did a great presentation about the group, the genesis, and what they're trying to accomplish. And so as we work through issues with that group related to the fourth management plan, obviously many of those issues carry over into the fifth plan, and this is what we kind of agreed to between DWR and the agricultural subgroup. And again, we went over this list in detail yesterday in the big 5MP, fifth management plan group meeting. So again, in many of those items, we reserved for referral back to this committee. So again, the first topic, best management plan history and objectives, and again, perspectives from the chair and others. And obviously, we wanted to include that in an early agenda, and here we are. So the second row for the fifth management plan, best management practices program, and comparing it to the base program, that analysis. We discussed some options for comparing the BMP program and the base program. There's a BMP lineage analysis subgroup created with some of the agricultural representatives, 3 of them, with our staff. That is ongoing. I think that will help inform this group about the requirement in the executive order that this group is supposed to look at that issue. And then the next row, the modification of the BMP point structure. We did discuss our view and agricultural entities' views of the statutory requirements related to that. And of course, we need this committee to look at that issue. Likewise, in the next row, we specifically called out the point accumulation, the total point accumulation, and wanted everyone to know that we had lots of discussions, especially led by Scott, about the technical accuracy of some of the BMP actions and how important that was to make sure they are technically accurate. And again, referring back to this committee. And then the tiered system, something that is not in the fourth management plan, but was being discussed as part of the fifth management plan. And so again, need input from this committee regarding that tiered system. And again, I'll reiterate that DWR's commitment is to make sure everything's on the table. There's no predisposed outcome from where we ended up with the fourth management plan. So you can go to the next slide. Again, and we don't have any real detail for this process. That's something I think to be developed with the leadership of the chair, Scott Riggins. But you all need to start thinking about what issues you might have that you might want to throw on the table for this committee to consider, again, given what the charge is of the committee back to the director. So with that, I will, again, before we move to Scott's agenda item, pause and allow for any comments or questions anybody wants to make on what we just talked about, Natalie's presentation or mine. So again, I'll wait a second. Scott, is that you wishing to speak?
I'm just waiting to,
Okay.
yes, just waiting to begin when we're ready.
All right, we're not seeing anybody. I don't think we are seeing anything in the chat box, correct? So I
Thank
think
you, Director.
we're
No,
ready.
there's, sorry, not seeing anything in the chat box at this time.
Great. So we're ready to move forward, and you go to the next slide, and it's just a cover slide. And so I'll turn it over to you, Scott.
Thank you very much, Director Bwk, and I would like to say, before I begin anything else, how much I personally and the regulated ag community thanks you and the department for the large number of meetings and public input that we've had over the last 6 months, and in particular your efforts in renewing the executive order and reestablishing this committee as a format of cooperation between regulated agriculture and the department to find solutions that are workable for both sides. It's something that has been done before and worked. It was a good model, and I'm very hopeful that we can use it again in the same way and come to solutions that are acceptable both for all the people out here trying to make a living in a tough occupation, and also for those that wish to see that water is used wisely in the state of Arizona. In preparing for this discussion of the history of the BMP program today, a great deal of directions were considered by me on exactly where to go with items, and finally, when I tied myself down to exactly what it is I thought I should talk about, I thought I should give a couple of those guidelines to everybody listening to this so they understand the perspectives that I'm going to get into. The first one is this is truly, in many ways, a trip down memory lane for me. Many of the things that we'll be discussing here, their memory is well over 20 years old. And they are sometimes in my files pretty well documented, and other times they're not. So if there are any mistakes in anything I say, I'm going to try to keep myself to things I'm sure of. But if I do make a mistake in an item that someone's there to remember, it would be lovely for them to point it out. But we will try to avoid mistakes, but we are trying to keep the things that pretty well are within documentation that I've been able to find or I was able to pretty firmly remember. Another concept, a guideline for this discussion is, I believe at this point in time with the formation, again, of the committee and its beginning of meetings, I'm going to limit the discussion during this presentation to just that, to history. When we get to the point in time where we start discussing the ramifications of the best management program with the fourth management plan, I'm not going to enter into those discussions. I feel that those are things for the committee to address after this formation meeting, after this history. Some of those things have been talked about, and it seems like there's directions that they have to go. Other ones seem to be maybe slightly contentious going forward, and there's no reason to air those at this time. The better time to do that is after the committee sits and has an agenda to discuss those concepts by itself. As I am also limiting myself in guidelines, there's one other concept in this, and that is that I'm going to state right off the bat that the third management plan was in many ways contentious and difficult, both for the regulated community and the department. It lasted for a long time. Indeed, it was so contentious that the adoption of the third management plan, agricultural conservation program, was delayed. We eventually had an executive order. But once we got to a certain point, all of those disagreements were folded into cooperation, and we moved forward very well for a very long time. From about 2000 and early 2002 onward, maybe even late 2001, we had ironed out the difficulties and started trying to contemplate the ways to move forward into programs that we decided to all share in their creation and create for the betterment of both the state and the regulated agricultural community. So one of the things I'm not going to do is I'm not going to spend hardly any time discussing all the difficulties and all the disagreements that were going on during the adoption and the promulgation and the discussions of the third management plan. They are past history, and they really aren't germane to how the BMP program went forward, because the BMP program was a result of the success in coming together with all those disagreements. So I'm not going to get into those histories either, because I don't really think they're germane or even appropriate at this point in time. Suffice it to say that we all finally decided how to go forward, and it was a success. Dave Roberts had a comment before I began this presentation about SRP's participation in this. And also, I wanted to go one last guideline before I begin. SRP was seminal in the third management program discussion times and the reconciling of disagreements, the shepherding of ideas. At the time, Dave Roberts and John Hetrick were present in almost everything. Their degree of knowledge and history would be every bit as good as my own. So Dave wanting to have something to say somewhere in this when I get done, I think it's very important, because they definitely will have memories, and they'll also have, because of their coming at it from a different direction, they will have different perspectives that they might wish to discuss. But all those things being said, I'd like to begin this discussion with the two seminal concepts that came out of the regulated community and the department finally finalizing and moving to an adoption of the third management plan. The first one was incredibly important. It doesn't have to do with the management plan, but it's important nonetheless. And that was that the department and the regulated community agreed that Arizona water law would be amended, and in statute 45-557 and 45-568, there was an agreement that water duties from that point on, their calculations could not be computed using more than 80% efficiency. So that was an agreement that was a great deal of contention was over that. It was finally reconciled. That's been incorporated into law now. And so that is a particular issue that no longer everybody agreed that that was the way to go, and that's where we are. The second thing that happened through the agreements to go forward with the third management plan was the establishment in statute of an Arizona Agricultural Water Conservation Agricultural BMP program and its resultant committee, codified under 45, 567, and 568. It was codified, an executive order was issued in May of 2002, and the department and the regulated community went to work to start to design a best management practices for the Arizona State Water Code. The first meeting, and I don't have minutes from the first meeting, but I see that all the elected or the nominated participants on the committee, their terms of office all ended on May 16th, 2004. So I'm taking that to mean that we had our first formation meeting very closely after the governor issued the executive order. And I believe that meeting probably was on the 16th of May of 2002. I was elected chairman at that time. So When this thing started, everything started working very quickly. Another date that's important in this is that the first enrolled BMP practice farm, 88-0001, was enrolled on January 22nd of 2004. So the work of the BMP committee to go through all of its aspects and get consensus, and that's very important to say. I'll get into how that is incredibly important later on, but how we got to consensus in a little over 2 years, well, actually less than 2 years, year and a half. We got to consensus on the philosophies and the technical design, took care of the details that were troubling its implementation, and actually had a sign up in a little over a year and a half. And there was full consensus in the way the program was designed. The committee was always incredibly encouraging that anyone that wished to come join the meetings would be invited and encouraged to be there, regardless of whether they were on the committee or not. I was chair of those meetings, and we didn't wait to let people who came in and had a point of view talk at the end at a call to the public. They were included in concepts as the meetings progressed. This was all a very transparent and I believe a very beneficial program that led to some good answers. And again, and I don't want to harp on this concept, it was a consensus design. Everyone agreed when we put the program out that the program was designed correctly. When we get back down to, as we were getting to the point to where we finally made some decisions to agree upon going forward with the third management plan between all parties concerned, the regulated ag community had two large problems that it was dealing with the BMP program. It also had an incredibly large problem with 85% efficiencies, but again, that isn't anything to do with the BMP program. That was a separate track. One of the things that we had going on in the Pinell AMA that was a very critical problem for a large number of people. There's an irrigation district down here called the Holcomb Irrigation District, and due to the addition of CEP waters to a district where the members owned their own wells, and also because of the water efficiency and design improvements that made over the years in those areas, as more water came into those right holders' world through CEP deliveries, they actually, even though they had incredibly efficient farms and worked very, very hard to create that efficiency and to conserve water as much as possible, as their supplies went up, they ran through their allotments. Now, there was other farms in other areas that had similar problems, but the mechanism to fix that was the purchase of flex credits. And so there were places where water availability went up and flex credits were purchased, and there were no emergencies. The program worked as it was designed. However, in the Holcomb Irrigation District, with their unique combination of new surface water supplies and non-district ownership of private wells, they truly got into a problem where there was no flex credits left to purchase. So you had productive farms with lots of water available, and all of a sudden they were having to fallow large portions of land, even though they were incredibly efficient, and they had no way to go forward. Without farming their land, they had no way to meet their obligations, and it was a true problem, seen as a true problem. The department agreed it was a true problem, and there was a lot of discussion how to go forward to alleviate that problem. To give some post-examination to that, indeed, the BMP did fix that. The BMP took it and made it so people could join the BMP. They had high levels of conservation on their farms, were able to qualify, were able to commit themselves to further practices. And the problem with the lack of flex credits there then for that period of time no longer made it so that entire irrigation district was having a problem being able to farm. Now, one thing that absolutely has to be stated, the reason for that problem was short-lived. To get the idea of, oh, well, the BMP program let these people use more water, and now you know they've used more water, and that's not within the base program and the conservation goals of the AMA. But it was a short-term problem because basically, as all of us know, the water supplies of the CAP districts have been gradually diminishing, and in the future will diminish to the point of virtually nothing. But in the years since the BMP program was formatted and people started joining, if in 2004 you were to look at the accumulated flex credits that there were in the whole CAM irrigation district, at the end of every purchase period, they would be virtually zero because everybody was buying everything they could. But the most current accounting of whole CAM flex credits I have is 2018. Over that period of time, that zero flex account balance has grown to be 150,000 acre feet because they no longer have the excess water supplies. They're well within their allotments now. And all of those farms that are in BMPs are a sterling example of how the BMP program can have more efficiencies, greater conservation, and participators committing themselves to higher levels of water use on their farms. That is exactly what we're trying to do with the BMP program. Long way to get into something that caused the problem, too much water supply. BMP program fixed the short-term problem, also gave years of enhanced conservation practices. Water supply went down. Now everything is back in order. The other concept that the regulated community was having trouble with as we were trying to figure our way into BMP programs was we were having quite a bit of discussion and disagreement on what maximum efficiencies should be. And one of the concepts that came to a great number of people in the ag community was that if the department said that a certain efficiency was what a water duty should be calculated upon, if you had certain programs in effect on your farm, certain designs there, if the department said the water duty should be computed on that, a great number of people thought that, well, if that's the case, then having all those things in place would also say that they were complying with the base management program efficiency requirements, because everything the department said would get you there, they had in place. And that was the seminal concept for moving into a BMP program, is the fact that if efficiencies are possible through having all these things, then a BMP program that mandates all these things gives those efficiencies. So a few of the things in the regulated community that led into some further discussions with the BMP program, we got there and we got an executive order and we got a statute passed. The statute is important to review at this point a slight bit because the wording is very, very important in the statute. The statute is referenced under both 45-567 and 45-568, both in the fourth management and the fifth management plan adoptions. But what is very, very important, and the one everybody looks at, is the very last sentence. And it says that the program shall be designed to achieve conservation that is at least equivalent to the requirement under 45.567 and 45.568, which are the base program. Two very important words that are in that sentence. The first one is, it states that the program shall be designed. What that tells us is that the BMP committee that was going to be effectuated under this new statute and executive order had a charge to look at all the various points under the executive order, which Director Bwk read, all the considerations that the committee was to review. They were to use all those criteria, and they were to take all the input that they could get, and they were to design a program to achieve conservation that was equal to the base program. So this group sat down and worked, brought in outside participation, did everything they could as under statute to design this program, and then they all 100% agreed with consensus that they had achieved a program that was equivalent in its use under the base program. And remember, we have the Department of Water Resources itself sitting on this committee. We have the Department of Agriculture. We have Federal Water Lab. We have municipality representation. And this was done through consensus. This wasn't agriculture designing this. All parties agreed that this met the requirement of conservation that is equivalent to the base program. There could be a very long discussion on that at this point in time. But again, this is an issue that will be discussed further when we start discussing the fourth management plan. But it is imperative that there's an understanding in the history of the BMP program that the statute required by design the BMP committee to advise on a program that achieved exactly what it was said to do. And all participants agreed. Now, in that design, I think it would be prudent at this point in time to actually get into the nuts and bolts of the BMP program as it was approved in the third management plan. The committee, as they began meeting, certain things were recognized right from the beginning that they had to be included in this. Primarily, certain agreed upon and long-standing high efficiency systems needed to be prioritized. In that, there were the first two categories of the BMP program application that dealt with water conveyance and also farm irrigation systems. Farm conveyance was a fairly easy concept for everyone to agree upon. A person needs to have things lined. You don't need to run things through dirt channels. If you have anything that runs that way, it has to be a detriment to the point score that you get. Anybody that runs a farm knows that dirt conveyances in this day and age with the cost of water and the cost of labor and all the things that happen don't work and they're wasteful. So that was a very simple thing to codify and put a percentage of everything that was done in line systems or pipeline systems. Got a percentage of the total points that were available, and if anything was not there, it detracted from it. There wasn't much difficulty with that. Where there was a great deal more discussion was in the concept of farm irrigation systems. Farm irrigation systems run the gambit of almost non-improved since the beginning of farming agriculture in the Vanilla AMA to some of the highest efficiency systems in the entire world. And they weigh more towards the high efficiency end because those systems that have never been improved truly have become uneconomical to even try to farm. That's why there's a lot of systems out there at this point in time, various rights, that oftentimes are used for fallow in various programs, or just sit fallow, because they're too expensive and too wasteful to farm. And they're too expensive at this point in time, particularly with diminishing water supplies in all directions, to try to create those improvements. But if we were going to mandate that we had efficiencies that were absolutely as high in all ways as the base program, as we gave points to all these systems going from absolutely zero systems, non-graded, non-slope, non-uniform systems. And also, by the way, I apologize. I had asked Chair Ward if we could have this worksheet up on the screen as I'm talking through it. My fault for not asking for that first. If we could shift on to the actual point page. There we are. I've already discussed category 1. Let's look at category 2. Let's bring category 2 up where we can see all of it. There we are. Everyone can see that there's a great number of different slope systems that are incorporated in this. And there are sprinkler systems that are incorporated in it. There's trickle that's incorporated in it. But one of the things that you'll see that was absolutely essential in this is down at the bottom, you will note that unless this section has a minimum of 2 points on it, there can be no enrollment in the BMP program. What this does is it makes those farms that are very, very inefficient, it makes them absolutely precluded from even joining the BMP program. This one particular point is enormous and absolutely shows much greater conservation, much greater efficiency than the base management program. You can't be in the BMP if you have an incredibly inefficient system. As you go through these points, when you're ranking an individual farm, there are farms that have combinations of incredibly efficient field units with some inefficient field units. And that's why all these different, very, very small, very low point systems were included, because some farms may have, 90% of what they have is just lovely and incredibly efficient, incredibly well done, that might have a field or two that would kick them out. Well, if everything qualifies for, if 95% qualifies for 3 points and 5% qualifies for 0, it would still qualify. That's part of the reason why the system was designed the way it was. But that one bottom line, that bad, non-improved, low efficiency conservation farms cannot even be in the BMP, was a huge agreed upon point that absolutely verified that we were designing systems that had greater conservation than any way could be achieved in the base program. Many discussions by many different users concerning the way the points work, their interactions. And as you can well imagine, with a lot of people with different experiences, there wasn't always full agreement on how to capture the differences in things. Like a lot of products that are figured out through committee, sooner or later you have to reach a discussion and an agreement on how to go forward. Personally, myself, I have some disagreements even here with this third management worksheet on category 2, on how some of these points should have been spread. Also, how some of these systems also should have tracked maintenance for points. Some of these things just weren't done. That doesn't mean they can't be done now, and they are the genesis of some of the things I hope that we will all be talking about to try to improve upon this and actually make it better. But need be it to say that at the end of the day, everyone did have full consensus to go forward with this because it gave the best representation of what we could possibly get done. If we could shift over to category 3. Category 3 and category 4 are very interesting and tangible evidence of the efforts and lengths miners of the BMP program went to make sure that the levels of conservation, the levels of efficiency, the desire to preserve precious water resources for as long as possible were met. The base program, a participant in the base program, need not do any of these things. Not a one. To be in the BMP program, you have to sign up and be able to provide evidence that you do things that very much enhance through management and practices on top of design the conservation of irrigation water. A few things that are in here that need to be noted. We did get one point in here that is very important. I hope to see it applied to some other practices, and that's the concept of laser touch-up. What that point mandates is not only does a field unit and a farm need to be designed to very high efficiencies, but it has to be maintained. Because like anything else, things don't stay the same. As they're used, they degrade. And touching up well-designed level systems is very important to maintain its highest level of efficiency. This was a maintenance item that was put in here. I'm very glad it got in there because it reflects the efforts that the participators in the BMP will go to keep their systems highly efficient. Another issue that is in here along similar lines, it isn't maintenance, but it's also very important to note that when we were back in category 2, we had different point values for high pressure sprinklers and low pressure sprinklers. Low pressure sprinklers being recognized to waste less water through evaporation. They have more points in category 2. But one of the most incredibly efficient systems for growing high value vegetables is solid set sprinklers that are put down very manually, very expensive process. The folks with ADWR that went to Duncan Family Farms and saw that entire farm with pipes laying everywhere and solid set sprinklers irrigating everything to the point of precision, realized the efforts of conservation that they're going to, the efficiencies they're trying to achieve. However, those temporary sprinklers that are incredibly efficient because their distances are small, their point application, there's so many things about them that are so efficient, conservation to a high level, but they're not low pressure, they're high pressure. But they still have incredible efficiency. This point was put down there to make it so someone who had incredibly efficient, solid set, temporary sprinklers recognized the full value of the conservation they were trying to do. I bring up these two items in category 3 just to point out the way all these points interlock with each other and the way they were designed. There was a lot of people with a lot of desire to do public good, had a lot of wisdom and experience in these systems, and they worked hard and listened to a lot of discussion to try to build in these practices that promote the best efficiency, the best conservation, also recognized the things that growers do that could be lost in this. Temporary sprinklers is an achievement. It shows how a great deal of thought was done in the interlocking of these points. I could bring up several other of these, but I think everybody gets the idea. These all work with each other. Every one of these in category 3, 3.1 through 3.12, is an extra practice that requires managerial and oftentimes great money effort to get points to make sure that the design of the Ag BMP program is not just as efficient, but a great deal more conservation than can be achieved under the base program. Let's move down to category 4 if we can. A different set of concepts here, not system concepts like category 3 are, not water management per se, direct practices, but agronomic management practices that can save enormous amounts of water. Things that if a manager does them, they are lessening their irrigation requirement and enhancing their efficiency in an industry recognized guaranteed fashion. Two of them that are just very simple to deal with and understand. 4.7, shaping furrows or beds. Those are programs that are done absolutely to wet the surfaces needed in a quicker fashion in an irrigation event, generally for the planting event. They're incredibly effective. Growers who really strive for efficiencies and conservation and lowering their water costs know to use that. And it's something for people that maybe haven't got to that point to be encouraged to do. But it is something that when a participant in the BMP program assigns himself into the BMP program, if he checks that box, he's guaranteeing that he's going to do it. He's saying, I am putting the responsibility on me to qualify for BMPs that I will do this to the extent required every single year, and I will certify to it. Quality of conservation and efficiency that nowhere is mandated or required in the base program. Another concept on the top, another easy one to see, crop residue management. The leaving of crop residue from the prior practices, how it works out, can absolutely ease the germination of the next crop and reduce water that's needed for that. It's a simple one. It's easy to see. But again, same point. It absolutely is bound onto this participant that now he has to do it and he has to show how he's done it. This is where we got to with the best management practices and the program that was designed and the one that was put out in the field. There were some difficulties that we had that were beyond the designing of the worksheet. One of them is just as I stated, that to get consensus agreement required a lot of discussion on this worksheet. It took a lot of time to get to the point to where there wasn't somebody to hold up their hand and say, no, I won't vote for this. But we worked through that and we got to a point to where the entire committee, as per statute, designed a program that gave equivalent, but in this case, actually far superior conservation to the best management program. A few other difficulties that we had, and they're One of them has pretty much been taken care of. It was difficult to understand exactly how you would bind people into this program because they're making commitments, they're bound. It was finally decided that the only way that this could go forward, and it did go forward in this fashion, is that a lessee could not enter this program unless he had an agreement from the owner of the right to do so. And indeed, the owner of the right has the say-so whether there's going to be a BMP on his right or not. So there was a decision that it was absolutely mandatory that both the land-owning community, the right holders, and the ones initiating and binding themselves to the practices both had to agree, or this could not go forward. Again, in the base program, that's not the case at all. There are times that lessees, either through mistake or design, deplete a landlord's flex account credits. There are times that various issues happen that are absolutely not beneficial between the landowner and the person that is farming or utilizing the water on the right. The BMP program, again, drew great strength in tying the two together and having them go forward in the direction of maximum design, conservation, and efficiency together. This was a strength of the BMP program, it still is. One difficulty that the BMP program had and still has, and it is a difficulty, and it's difficult to understand how to make it any better than it is the fact that BMPs, once they're formed, once there's a 0.0001 right, all it takes is for that person to lose a portion of that farm or to sell a portion of that farm, and all of a sudden we have to have a split right. And as you have the years go by with that, oftentimes you have a single BMP that I don't know how, I haven't looked to see how high some of the split numbers go, but I wouldn't doubt in the last 15 years to where we have some that are 6 or 7 iterations. There are also still some that are at 1, some that are still the same way they were in the beginning. But that tracking of properties and the changing is a difficulty in the program. However, again, the holder of the BMP right, the farmer, the leasee of the farms, is obligated every single year to clean up the various rights that he has associated with his right. And if he has changes in land, he needs to go ahead and put that on his report, and he needs to go forward and correct how it's changed. It's generally a technical change. It generally doesn't change the way the BMP works, but it is necessary to alert the department on how there's been changes in lands. And that's something I'm sure that we'll be discussing exactly how those things work as we go forward as well. Finding myself in a position to where my throat is getting scratchy to the extreme, and I've probably said nearly everything that I wanted to say, I would like to, again, thank the department. I'd also like to thank a lot of members in the regulated agricultural community at the irrigation districts. I'd like to thank them all that we all got into a position half a year ago to where we started looking at how agriculture is a unique entity, how a great deal of the things that it needs to do and how it conserves water and how it promotes the goal of the AMA are not necessarily obvious on the surface. And I absolutely applaud the department in their diligence in trying to update and educate their staff on agricultural practices, the interaction of agriculture with the code, the things we do, why we do it. I think that in itself is a success. And with that, I'll close this presentation. I'll open it to any questions there are for me. I'll open it hopefully to Dave Roberts having some comments, but I will close it on two successes. One of those successes is the way the department and all the regulated parties have come together in this, I feel, very well thought out format to go forward and create our next iteration of BMP programs. And secondly, I would like to comment on the absolute success that the current BMP program has had in educating growers, in having growers bind themselves into the most efficient and conservation oriented programs they can have, and the success that the BMP program has brought to the Pinal AMA and the Phoenix AMA in meeting their conservation goals. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the director.
Thanks, Scott. And I agree with you on your two huge success points. I'm going to turn it over to Dave Roberts in a second, but first I want to say two important things. One, Scott covered a tremendous amount of material. We have and are recording this meeting. We'll get that recording posted. That way folks will have the opportunity to re-listen, because I'm sure no one had the opportunity to take enough notes to track everything that Scott was covering. Second, I will say that, again, in terms of the director's requirements to create a program essentially equivalent to the BMP, to the base program, one of the points of disagreement that still exists, honestly, between DWR and the ag community is that DWR sees another statutory requirement that's in the law that says, you know, the programs need to be assigned, the management programs plans need to be designed to achieve reductions in groundwater withdrawals. And we see that as increasing requirement with each plan. We are reviewing how that requirement fits with the BMP program under the statutes internally. We need to have more discussion with you all about that philosophically, what the statutes mean, if the statutes have any conflict or inherent or explicit. So it's an important point I wanted to bring up, because I think that is why that requirement about achieving additional reductions is why we did increase the point requirements in the fourth management plan under the BMP program. So this is a huge thing to discuss in this committee and come to some agreement on how different parts of the law might interact well or maybe not interact so well, and how do we deal with that. So I know that Dave Roberts wants to speak, so with that I'll turn it over to Dave. Dave, I think you can unmute yourself.
Yep, I have. Thank you, Tom. Certainly Scott was a significant part of this entire process that we went through in the early 2000s, and has a lot more information about the details in developing all of the different aspects of the BMP program after it was agreed to be put in place. He didn't want to talk about the history so much, and I just want to, I think there are a couple of important aspects of the history that you should all be aware of, because believe it or not, it's repeating itself in this process that we're going through right now. At the time that all of this was happening, there was a significant disconnect between the ag community and ADWR over the work the department had done in preparation for the second management plan ag conservation program, and specifically over the technical and economic feasibility of information for demonstrating the 85% irrigation efficiency, which I think was really based on the level basin concept for farmers. There wasn't a lot of information that was shared between the department and the ag community. The department sort of went on by itself, developing all this information, and then just sort of laid it on the ag community saying, this is what you've got to achieve. And so there was a significant disconnect about that. And that's what led to much more conversation between the department and the ag community, and the development of some more information that demonstrated that 85% was probably going to be more difficult to achieve and certainly not economically feasible to achieve. And so that's what led to the negotiations towards the 80% efficiency. It also led to the development of the BMP program that Scott laid out in a lot of detail for you. But what was important about the BMP program was that there was an advisory committee developed that you all are aware of. And that advisory committee was to enhance the dialogue and the conversation between agriculture and the department over the analysis, the technical and economic feasibility analysis of various types of irrigation water management practices that could be adopted into a BMP program over time. And that's really the focus of that committee, was to really engage the department and the ag community in a continuing dialogue for a long period of time to really, again, if there were going to be new BMPs employed, they needed to be technically feasible and they needed to be economically feasible. And those were two challenges that the ag community was facing at the time. And so that was the whole point of that committee. Unfortunately, probably after about the mid-2000s, due to lots of different factors, including the loss of a lot of department staff and just the fact that things were progressing seemingly well with respect to the ag community and DWR, the ag community and DWR sort of lost touch. There was a delay in the fourth management plan work, and so there wasn't a lot of conversations going on between the ag community and the department over conservation programs. And so now we're back in the same situation we were in the late 90s, where the department is proposing some changes to the BMP program. I think there are potentially some issues about the technical and economic feasibility of that. There may be some other issues as well, but hopefully the BMP advisory committee will get back together and the conversations between the department and the ag community will continue and won't stop. And we'll work through these issues and get to a point where the highest level of conservation in the BMP program that is technically and economically feasible for farmers can be deployed. And I hope that continues. It's unfortunate that over the last 10 or 12 years that hasn't been, but we will get there. So those are just a few comments that I wanted to make, Tom. I'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody has any.
Thanks, Dave. So I just want to add to what you said, Dave, about this committee, and I think what hopefully everybody recognizes by the reconstituting an extension of the executive order by Governor Ducey, that really is indicative of the commitment DWR is making to get back to the place that you described, Dave, and that Scott described and others described, and desire to have that ongoing dialogue with the agricultural community, and especially over this program. So we are committed to doing that. This committee meeting is the first step in that process, and hopefully we can create a lasting process in which we don't create a gap again out into the future like was created in the mid-2000s and early 2010s. So I will open up an opportunity for others to add to this discussion or comment or ask questions. There's probably a couple of folks on this webinar right now, this virtual meeting, that also directly participated. So I'd be happy and encourage those folks to weigh in if they so desire. And I'll give folks a chance to unmute if they want to do that.
Chair, this is Michael Curtis with the Hohokam Irrigation and Drainage District. Comment. Will all of the materials become preserved in such a way as to where with regrettably there will be a turnover in ADWR staffing, but that as new staff come on board in the future, that there will be a kind of a job requirement that to the extent they are committed to working on these programs, that they familiarize themselves then with the history that will be established?
So Mike, some of that has been lost over the years. I will do what I can as the director, while I am the director, to make that happen. Under the Arizona Management System, we have a concept called standard work. That's kind of our roadmap to how we should do our work, and it's a perfect place for us to do exactly what you said with new employees and existing employees, to follow that standard work and make these materials available to them and have that kind of continuing education go on, and we will do that there.
With all due respect, I don't know that we'll have Scott Riggins and Dave with us in perpetuity.
Well, I hope you put me in that category as well.
Oh.
I'd like to retire someday too. But anyway, it's a point well taken, Mike. And we have, again, lost a lot of the materials over the years, maybe partly because AMA offices were shut down. We had the big riff. DWR's moved around from building to building here or there over the years. And honestly, we don't have a lot of materials in our files. I'll just be honest with everybody. So if anyone has anything from back in the day that they'd be happy to send me, we will put that into our files and be more careful about keeping it out into the future.
If I could add, I'll just add one small thing to that. We do intend to create a page on our website for this that will link to directly from the AMA webpage. So there will be dedicated space on our website as well for the meeting information for this group.
Hey, Tom, this is Brian Betcher. If I could add just a couple of things.
Hey, Brian.
Good to hear all of you guys and see this. I'm really encouraged that this is being brought back up again, because this was a trip down memory lane for me, because I had the opportunity to serve with John Hetrick on behalf of Maricopa Stanfield during the development of this program. And what I wanted to add to the history is a big shout out to Maricopa Stanfield as a district, and particularly under the leadership of Grant Ward. When Dave Roberts was mentioning the whole challenges of the technical and economic review of the Second Management Plan Conservation Program, that was very contentious, and there was a lot of leadership shown by the Pinal districts. And I give Grant a huge shout out for being a strong leader in that, and working with Agribusiness Water Council and working with SRP during those days. And looking at the program sheet that Scott went through, it brings back a lot of memory. And for those of you that didn't work on it, that was a huge, huge progress step to be able to categorize all those individual programs and assign them a relative value, and to balance that among the 4 different categories. To see that again going to the 5th management plan, I think is essential for the state. So again, it's great to see. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. I'm glad you mentioned Grant's name, because when we pulled up the existing list of this committee, of course, Grant was one of the members of this committee back in the day. So I know we have a couple other folks in the chat box that want to speak. So.
Thank you, Director. I have a comment here from Shane Leonard. He says that as a member of that prior Ag BMP committee responsible for the adoption during the 3rd management plan, I concur and support Dave's comments. Shane has a follow-up comment. You are welcome to unmute, Shane.
Thank you. Again, Shane Leonard, General Manager, Roosevelt Water Conservation District. I won't belabor what has already been said. but in an attempt to help clarify and maybe also get everybody down the direction we were headed. One important point I personally like to point out is, as Dave indicated, and I'll be a little stronger in my words, it was a very, very contentious situation. And I'd like folks to recognize, if they can, that this director and this department are much more amenable to working with us and how we can achieve a BMP program that works for everybody than was that particular administration. Just by what's been said today, I think that's clear. As a particular point, the irrigation districts themselves, as an opportunity to assist the BMP, I also want to point out that it was very important that it wasn't simply a function of irrigation districts and growers signing up on a piece of paper and here's a point system. What was also necessary was the follow-up to prove that those activities were occurring in the field and in the irrigation districts and on the farming operations. But the department had a level of comfort that those were being done and they were reproducible and all the things that we like to see when it comes to how we report. And the irrigation districts had a big focus on assisting with that. And so in as much as I believe we will need to focus on the individual farms as well as the farming operations, as we did, and I almost hesitate saying this, way back then, the irrigation districts is going to be incumbent on us to assist our growers as well as the department with ensuring that nexus of information is held. Again, my personal opinion is that's part of what's been lost. In as much as we can state, and I fully believe, Ag has been successful in adopting the BMP program, I believe that we need to further prove that and then work moving forward from a technical aspect as well as a cooperative aspect to make certain this happens. So with that, I believe what you are hearing is the commitment by irrigation districts and their growers to work cooperatively with the department, and that's what got us where we were and how we can move forward. And because the request has been made and we recently moved, I do know that we have records related to how we did the Ag BMP program and correspondence. And assuming my attorney doesn't tell me it's all privileged, I'll be happy to forward that on to department staff so that they can take a review and see if it makes sense with what they remember. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Shane. Just send your attorney on vacation for a while. So I want to address one thing, and the key to the success of this committee and moving forward are open and honest dialogue, and I encourage folks to do that. That doesn't have to result in a hugely contentious process, but we know sometimes there's going to be disagreements. But fear of having those disagreements, if that results in the lack of open and honest communication, we're going to have a hard time being successful. So I think I'll just encourage, again, people to keep that in mind as we go through these discussions. So I think we have some other folks in the chat box here.
Thank you, Director. We have a comment from Joe Singleton. Joe, you're welcome to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Joe Singleton, Pinal County Water Augmentation Authority, and formerly Pinal AMA. So I can assure you that Dave and Shane are not underselling how contentious this issue became in the past. And my fear was we were heading down a similar road with some of the ag discussions for the 5th management plan. So I'll add my thanks to you, Tom, and Chuck Podolak with the governor's office for having this group put back together. As we find ourselves kind of short on staffing resources with a lot of background in this area, I'd add that we were there actually a little bit before the RIF. And one of the ways that this program was able to be implemented and kind of keep going through the years in large part was due to Irrigation Management Service and Eddie Enriquez. So I would hope, although we have a pretty aggressive timeline that I hope doesn't necessarily cut off the work that we might do with this group, that at some point, if your schedule allows for it and the NRCDs were willing, that Eddie might be able to weigh in on some of these issues that we're looking at moving through time, since he helped so many people fill out their enrollment paperwork explain how to qualify and what it was going to require on an ongoing basis, as well as doing ongoing evaluations for some of those BMP farms. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to a lot of good work out of this group.
Thanks, Joe. And I'll just say in regards to Eddie and that work that we have continued at DWR to fund, with the withdrawal fees, that program. We recognize the importance of that, even in some years where that money's gotten tight and will be getting tied out into the future. We definitely recognize the value of that program. And Scott, in his presentation, talked about the importance of management and maintenance. So we will continue to use every effort we can to continue to fund that. And I appreciate the comments about the governor's office, Chuck, et cetera, in helping to get this together. But I would be remiss if I didn't point out that this really was as much the agricultural subgroup, those 20 folks, and Scott as a member of that group that helped us get there as much as it was DWR on its own. So anyone else in the chat box?
Thank you, Director. Just a comment from Chris Udall. He says that the Agribusiness Water Council working with the board will review files and provide any history to ADWR.
Appreciate that.
And Joe Singleton also says he will check the boxes in his garage for Ag BMP stuff.
So that's where they went. Joe took them with him. I'm just kidding. I do appreciate the comments that everyone are making about looking to beef up our historical files, which are so often gone out of this department. And again, I know that might be a burden for you all, and we will protect those as best we can when folks get those things to us. We certainly have much more capability now to electronically scan materials than we did back then. And it's, again, one of our initiatives within our department is to do better at scanning materials for the future, for posterity, and it saves us money in a lot of different ways when we do that. So appreciate that. Any other folks
thanks,
in the chat box?
Director. We have a comment from Alex Arboleda. You are welcome to unmute yourself, Alex.
Yes, thank you. I said this at the meeting yesterday, but I just wanted to say it again here. I'm speaking on behalf of Katy, Central Arizona Irrigation and Drainage District, and we just want to thank the director and the department for your responsiveness. We, a couple of months ago, requested that you reconvene this advisory committee based on the old executive order, and requested that you reconvene it prior to the final adoption of the fourth management plan, because it did expire. And the department was very responsive and got this other executive order done, extending the time frame, and has worked quickly to convene this committee. I think it was very productive and helpful to get all the history today. And I'm looking forward to what this committee will achieve. So again, thank you very much for your responsiveness to that request.
Thanks, Alex. Anyone else in the chat box?
Thank you, Director. I'm seeing no other comments at this time.
So thank you, everyone, and I especially appreciate the positive comments towards the department and our staff. That's very much appreciated. So we'll move on then to some next steps. So if you could advance the slides. Go ahead. So these are some potential topics that we put together on this slide. You've heard a little bit about this already when I went through the chart earlier. And again, on the left side of this chart, we're hearing now some additional background and history. When we talked with the chair, he thought it might be beneficial, especially given the beneficial nature of the field trip that was put together for DWR staff, that there might be a value in having a field trip for this committee, we can talk some more about that. Again, we talked about some issues previously. We need to expand that list. We talked about scheduling this in concert with the fifth management period time frame. On the right side, we tried to capture some additional potential issues. Again, this issue of the comparison to the base program, we talked about that a lot already. Again, in terms of individual BMPs, we had some discussion already with the chair and others about perhaps the technical accuracy or lack thereof of some of the BMPs and how that relates to the points. Potential additional BMPs. And one of the things that we heard today, and one of the things we've heard in past meetings, is how, as a matter of economic survival, that the farming is being done on the most efficient lands. And I am not sure myself that we are actually capturing that in the current BMP actions and points. And maybe that'll be a tough task to figure out a way to do that and assign values, et cetera. But to me, I think that's something I definitely want to have discussions about. We talked about the tiers, we talked about the total points. And Scott, in relation to category 3 and 4 of the sheet, the point sheet, which were management and maintenance, those are certainly other areas that we can focus on. So Scott, I don't know if you want to opine at this point about any additional topics, or if you have already thought through how additional topics might be brought up by the committee members or through this committee process.
Thank you very much, Director Chosky. I suppose that there is a certain necessity at this point in time to know who our membership is. I think that I believe that this foundational meeting today was very important. I so much thank the department for the steps it made to help get this as early as in December as it was, for the various discussions and various things we have to look forward to as far as what we're going to try to come to grips with, and the tasks and the discussions that we're going to have. But we need to get our people seated.
So Scott, again, I mentioned earlier that folks who have been already proposed need to get their applications into the boards and commissions through the governor's website. There's a little bit of a vetting process that goes with that. I will continue to keep in close touch with Chuck Podolak in the governor's office, who's overseeing this process from my perspective to help me and to help you all. The boards and commissions person is someone different than Chuck, the actual director of that office within the governor's office, but Chuck's in contact with her, and we'll do everything we can to expedite the approval and the selection by the governor of those folks and get the oaths of office signed, which is part of the process. So I will continue, Scott, to try to push that as quickly as we can. So I will just say, if folks in this virtual meeting have ideas about additional items for the committee that we haven't either talked about or are not showing up on slides, et cetera, haven't shown up in Scott's presentation, you can send them to us at DWR. We'll help compile them and have conversations with you, Scott, if that works for you. So happy to do that. And I think they can go to either Natalie or to Carol Ward here in the department. And if you do send them to me, I'll forward them on. But I get 150 emails a day, so please don't. But yes,
thank
you. Do that.
Thank you very much. In those lines, to address the specific question that you asked me as far as how the slide I'm looking at, how it addresses the topics that are up for discussion, I think it actually captures it quite well. Potentially, each one of those bullet items needs to have a little bit more meat attached to it and be split into 2 bullet items, which will take a little bit more time and an examination than I can do in a quick fashion. But certainly what you have here now on this slide does capture a great deal of what it is that we will be talking about, I believe.
So Scott, how about if we work with you on that, and when we further expand a little bit on this list, and then we can decide maybe for a next meeting what issue or issues we might want to start to tackle. I agree that it would be, in a perfect world, everyone would be seated before we can tackle issues, but I'd hate to wait to start tackling the issues. So I don't have a projected date for a next meeting yet, but as we work together on, again, this issue list and figuring which ones we want to tackle first, that I think can inform us about when the next meeting might occur. Does that work, Scott?
I would be incredibly gratified to have the opportunity to work with DWR staff on this list to flesh it out and potentially make it somewhat more inclusive, or decide that it's fine in its fashion it shows right here. But I just have a feeling that there just needs to be a little thought given to that, but all it will be is an amendment to what we're looking at right now, in my opinion. And yes, I would very much look forward to working with ADWR to help with this first meeting agenda.
Director Bershowski, this is Michael Curtis again with Hohokam District. In subsequent meetings, well, as you point out, the appointment by the governor to fill out the official committee list may not be totally completed. Will those meetings be open to people, we used to say in the old days, to sit against the wall and observe what is going on, and will notice be given of those meetings?
So yes, notice will be given to the meetings. We will post the meetings on the meeting date and eventually the agenda on our website. Yes, as this meeting was, it's open to anybody who wants to join. Again, if we get back to in-person meetings, we will have a room. The room will be limited in size, but we can do both a combination of virtual and in-person so that we don't have to limit the number of folks that can participate. So we need this to be what you described, and that's open to anyone that wants to participate. And I think we can also make sure that the mailing list for the 5th Management Plan Agricultural Subgroup gets notified of the BMP committee, and I think we did that prior to this meeting as well. We tried to cull through some of our contact lists and send out a message for this meeting as well. So we're trying to disseminate the existence of this committee, the meeting dates and the agendas as widely as we can, because we would like as much participation as we can garner. So Scott and I will work on the timing and agenda for the next meeting, as we just discussed. For the good of the order, does anyone else participating want to address us at this time? I'll pause a second.
What is Scott Reagan's email address?
Scott? Not unless he does. I don't know if we lost Scott. I hesitate to hand out his email address without Scott's acquiescence, but Mike, if you need to get anything to Scott, send it to me and I'll send it.
It was a little bit of a joke. It's okay.
Okay.
I'll touch base with you. Thank you very much. I think you've conducted as one of possibly the fewer dinosaurs still around. I compliment you on the way you've handled this. And Scott, thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else before we adjourn?
Thank you, Director. I'm not seeing anything else in the chat box at this time.
So I want to thank all of you for your participation and look forward to your continued participation out into the future. So with that, we will adjourn. Thank you all.
Thank you.